Hello, friends, and welcome to Season 9 of the Future Ready Librarians podcast series, Leading from the Library. This is a podcast for all librarians wherever you are in your journey. It is filled with amazing guests, important topics, and engaging conversations that will inspire, engage, and support all of us as future ready librarians. I am your host, Shannon McClintock Miller. I am the district teacher librarian at Van Meter Community School in Van Meter, Iowa, and serve as the Future Ready Librarians leader. I have the pleasure of working within my library and school community and also with others around the country and world through the Future Ready Librarian events, conferences, consulting, writing, and more. I am honored to bring these voices and the work of others to our podcast and to all of you. Well, today on our podcast, we have a very special guest, and she is coming all the way from Germany, right, Kelley?
That's right. I currently live in Germany. Yeah,
So
but I'm from Kansas, so.
You're from Kansas? Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool. So I am so excited for you guys to meet my new friend, Kelley, and she is going to talk today about bringing storybook walks into schools. And so I couldn't be more excited to have you on, Kelley, and just to learn more about story walks. But we're first going to start just by hearing a little bit more about you.
Okay. All right. I am Kelley Donner. Like you said before, I am an author and illustrator. I wasn't always an author and illustrator. I worked for a long time as a teacher. Due to my husband's job, I've gone all over the planet. We lived for a while in first in Germany and then in New Zealand, then back in Germany, then in England, and now in California, and now back in Germany again. So, because of that, what's been kind of nice is I've gotten to know a little bit about how different reading is and teaching in different parts of the world, especially the English parts, and that's been really fascinating. And I think when I finally took my art and English teaching and brought it into illustration and writing and illustrating, I started to see a little bit more what works in some places and like how to bring that all together.
Oh, that's so
So now I've been
cool.
doing that, just writing and illustrating for about the last 5 years. But
Oh,
I miss the classroom sometimes. I really do.
well, it's a way that you can have an impact on kids
Yeah.
and teachers and librarians in different ways. And so we're really excited to have you on the podcast. And so let's just start. People listening, some people might have not heard of a storybook walk. And I am so excited to talk about this topic because we're actually putting a walk into our community this year and couldn't be more excited to ask you even just some questions that are going to be helpful to me. But I know that our listeners, from if they've never heard one or maybe they've had one, I think that this conversation is just so important for all communities.
Okay. It's probably the easiest way to say what a storybook walk is to explain how I first heard about them. So like about a year ago, I'm on a lot of the librarian forums, and just to kind of get used to the trends, what's going on, what are people talking about, and I found out that a lot of librarians were talking about story walks, and I found out from some of them that they were using my books that I had written for their story walks, but to do this, they had to buy 2 or 3 copies of the book and take them apart. So I asked, what exactly do you need for this? And they said, well, for a story walk, we take 2 books apart so that we can lay each spread, which is a double-sided page, onto a large piece of paper, and then put any banner info we want to and laminate it. And then in order to do this, it helps to have 2 books to take apart and 1 book to know what the order to put the book back together. And I thought, wow, on the one hand, I thought this is a great idea. I hadn't heard of story walks before, and putting them up on a path, I thought that's a great idea. I have a hard time sitting still, and so being able to like read.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I thought, oh my gosh, this is awful that librarians have to take apart 3 books in order to make this. Why is there no such thing as like a story walk edition? And so I started looking into it a bit. I found out that Anne Ferguson started the Storywalk project back quite a few years ago, and that she had been setting up that kind of thing, but it was always on a path. outside in these permanent displays. And I thought, I'm a teacher. I want to bring this in a school. So I thought, how can I do that? And so I sat down on my computer and I took the one book that I had that was the most popular, which you can't see now because it's kind of blurred on my camera, but was The School is More Than a Building. And I thought, how can I lay this out on a computer so that you only need one copy? And so that's how I developed this Storybook Walk edition, which I call a Storybook Walk, because I'm selling it under my name and things and to separate it a little bit. But so that's how I got into it. And then my brain started going more and more like, what can I do? How can I bring this to schools? How can I get other authors involved? And that's how I first got into the whole idea.
I love that. And so that is so cool. And I think that that's something that I know that my sister Heather, she's done a lot of story walks within her community, and they're always either outside or they have this great, like, beautiful pond in their community in Amana. And so she has brought a lot that way. But I think that it's neat to rethink, like, how we actually, bring those to our schools and how, like, the book thing, like, that's genius. So tell us more about that. So in an edition of a storybook walk, you
Yeah.
wouldn't need to buy like multiple versions.
Right. So the idea with the Storybook Walk edition is that you need one book, right? So that when you open the book up, you either tear out the pages or if you have a really great paper cutter, you could just cut along the dotted line on the side. I usually fold them open and tear out 2 or 3 pages at a time, and then I cut along the dotted line. And each spread is white on the back. So you
Yeah.
only, yeah, and then they're set up so that because there's a gap in the middle of white, when you put the dotted lines in together, then the illustration matches up perfectly. And this is always a big problem normally with storybook walks because
Yep.
if you cut apart, even when you cut apart a book, illustrations are always set up usually so that you don't have anything very fancy or important in the middle, but you still have a bind. And where it's bound together, that kind of goes in. And it's really hard to tear in the
Yeah.
exact middle. So by taking that a bit out and then making sure the illustrations are pulled apart so that when you cut it out, you don't mess anything up. That was another part of it. So this way you just cut it out on the dotted line, match up the spreads, and it's done at a size so that you can immediately put it in an 11 by 17-inch laminated pouch, run it through your laminator, and then it's ready to hang
Genius. And
up.
so you also said one thing that I find to be so interesting too is that you don't necessarily have to do it outside. And so how do you envision that, like at schools?
Okay, well, there are lots of ways. In the beginning, I first thought, okay, hang it on a hallway, but then, but then I thought, wait a second, a lot of libraries have windows. So you can hang a story along a windows, in a school. Um, I have a friend of mine, he wrote this cool book about food. You can hang it in the lunch line on the wall so that when the kids are waiting in the lunch line, that they could be reading a story. I came up last year with an idea for a storybook run, which can be done in gym class or outside at like field day or whatever on a fence, where each of the pages has activity prompts on the bottom that tell kids to go back to a page, to run back to a page and maybe skip to the next page or to jump. And so they have to do a lot of moving between them. So that's in order to bring it more into schools, one of the things I added to all the books is on the bottom are prompts.
That's what I was going to
Yeah.
ask about. Yeah.
So there's different kinds. Should I get into the prompts?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay,
That's
so
one thing too
I
that
have
I think is so
three
important.
different kinds of prompts. One is just the basic activity prompt, like um, give your neighbor a high five, or jump in the air and shout hooray, do 5 jumping jacks, just typical kind of things to get kids moving. Those work well if you're outside or if it's something not too active. I mean, giving a fist bump or something you could also do if it's on a hallway without bothering a class that's maybe in session. And then I have discussion prompts. I use this on the books that are a little bit more in depth, maybe a little bit for older kids, where you can get a little bit more into the topic. And these discussion prompts can be anything from maybe historical questions to think about. Why did the writer write something? Or why do you think something happened in the book? Or plot analysis. And then you've got literacy prompts you can also do for fun. And you can mix these together. Like you could say every time you hear like read it out loud, and when you hear a short sound, jump up. Right? I mean, you
Perfect.
can mix things
Yes.
together,
Fun.
or you can say just, how many, I'm trying to think of all the different ones, but yeah, you can bring a lot there's a zillion different prompt ideas you can do, but they make the books interactive.
Yeah.
Um, I'm doing a few Storybook Walk editions for other authors, and one of them has this really great book with lots of um, sound words like creak and crack and whatever is kind of a scary story. And so for his, I did prompts that repeat. So the first page you do one prompt, like maybe it's stand up, and the second one, then you have to do something that you add to it. So you do the first prompt plus the second one. Then you go to the third page, and then you have to do the first and the second and the third prompt until some of them are spoken, some are movement, some are that by the end they have to remember all the different things they have to do. Yeah.
So fun. Well, and that's
So
what I was
like
going
it
to say
makes
is
reading
there's,
hopefully a little bit more fun, just like not
yeah.
just a book, but an activity.
And I
Yeah.
love that because there's so many fun ways to, I think that kids will want to revisit like things that they see when you're getting not just reading a book, but when you're actually doing something. And that's what I love. I always love to see that when like families can participate with their kids,
Yeah.
in some experience that they have. And so I think that is a really special thing too that they can do. So, what other things do you think about when you think about like the storybook walk? Are there other activities that teachers and librarians can tie together into these great experiences too?
Well, I get most of my inspiration from you guys, from the librarians out there, and I've seen some who have done wonderful station activities with Storybook Walks, where they really just decide like on one page, I have a prompt which is just that they need to tell a joke. And this librarian thought, oh, that's a great idea. I'll put a little cup next to it, like a station with a bunch of jokes in it. And they can pull out a joke and read it. And she made it into stations so that every single page was a station with a different activity that they had to do along with my prompt. And I thought, that's great. Stations are fun. And so then I took that idea. And for another author that I'm working on, his book is about rocks. And so I thought, we'll do stations with rocks so that in the beginning they have to grab a rock, and then as they go through, analyze their rock and see how it's different or the same and draw on it. You know, and so I think stations are good. If you're doing STEM activities, you could bring in things. You can bring in experiments or, art activities. There's lots of things you can do to add to different stations.
That's great. Yeah, one of my favorite things to do is to use picture books and really bring them to life. And so I love these ideas or special times of the year or events. And I think those conversations and activities are so cool. You got me thinking about so many things. I love it.
Yeah.
So people who are listening to, I'm sure that one thing that, and I know I thought about this for a long time too in our community, is just like, how do we do this? Like, how do we do this on a budget? Where do we, even like brainstorming, like where we find these ideas on bringing it to our school?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think when it comes to budget, you really need to think about what you're going to do. You have on the one hand, of course, that you could make a permanent display like the traditional story walk outdoors, but they can cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Like you're going to need a grant probably to get that together, or businesses, whatever. Um, I think it's easier to think about, where do I have an area where I can hang something up? If you want to do it outdoor, it's really easy to use different kinds of clips to hang them on fences. And a fence, usually most school fences are perfect for reading because they're at a kid's height, and you can hang them up. You can also use yard signs, and like the ones that they use for elections. I think those work for smaller kids better because they're a bit lower to the ground. I usually prefer the fence because then your maintenance department doesn't also say, I need to mow the lawn, right?
Yeah, it's a
Um,
great idea.
right. So you always have to think of all these other things going on too, but I have a few hanging hacks on. I set up a website called StorybookWalks.com with all of the activities and ideas and books and things for people to look at if they needed more inspiration or wanted to know how to do it. Um, and There I give a few ways on how to display it. Yeah, because I think hanging it on a wall, on a window, on a fence is the cheapest way to do it. If you get like a DIY edition and do that, you can easily do a walk for, under $20. If you don't laminate it, you could even do it cheaper, but I think most schools probably have laminators
Mhm.
that you can use.
Yeah,
So there's
definitely.
there's a budget for all different kinds of things. And I'm trying to I'm working together with some other authors to try to bring out more books, which is taking a little bit of time. But at the moment, there's only one I have, which is a ready to use laminated walk, which is already an 11 by 17. That's The School is More Than a Building. Um, and I think if that catches on and a lot of people buy those, then I'll get other authors to do more of those that are the ready to go ones. I think right now the DIY editions for 16.99 are probably pretty feasible for most. I have a book that works really well if you want to know how to do a storybook walk. I just brought it out. It's called How to Create a Storybook Walk. And it has in it everything you need to know from how to do it from scratch. If you're taking a book and you want to put it together, what you need to know with copyrights and permission from authors, what display ideas you have, where you can put it up, how do you write a prompt, what prompts can you do, a bit more information on those. Plus, there's also some fun things like alternative walks, meaning walks that you don't even need to hang up that you can do using laying them
Cool.
down on chairs and things or activities. It's pretty much everything that I've researched and found out in the last few months all together in one book that
Love
hopefully
that.
will help a lot of people out.
That's so
Yeah.
great. I know. I cannot wait to read that. And I have another question because I'm sure you like said it really briefly, but one big question I think that people have is, and I'm sure that we can all find it too in your amazing book, but like the copyright and permissions
Okay.
from authors and illustrators. That's a huge question that I've had too when I've spoke to other people. Like, how do we do that part?
Well, it's kind of difficult because on the one hand, libraries have an exemption clause, which allows them to be able to do a certain amount of cutting and copying and whatever without having to worry about things. But it's still kind of vague as to what extent storybook walks are in that or not, um, because they haven't been around for as long. And as an author myself, I think anytime anyone is taking your material and they're cutting it up and pasting it and do something else with it and displaying it for other people to look at, it's always a good idea to ask for permission,
Yeah.
just out of respect to the author. But that's not always easy to do. If you have a local author or a self-published author, you can often find their information online on their website, and they're usually easy to find because yeah. I have on storybookwalk.com, I've contacted through my forums lots of authors and illustrators and said, would you like to have your books used for storybook walks? Are you okay with this? And if they sign a form and okay that, then I put their books on my site. So those are all, anybody can use. You can order those books. They have direct links to Amazon, and then you can just order the books there and then know when you cut them apart and display them, you're not going against any copyright.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But otherwise, you can also, if you want to get a really big book from a big publisher, then you would write to their rights department and give them information on where you're going to do the walk,
Mhm.
how you're going to display it, and all that kind of thing. But that
Oh,
might take a while to get an answer back.
yes. It might
Yeah,
be a few more hoops, but maybe
yeah.
possible though. This
Like I
is so
said,
helpful.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to put all of this together as much as I can from all the authors I know and people like on storybookwalk.com. So eventually that's all you need to do is just go there and then you can, whether
Yeah.
you're doing a DIY edition or finding someone else's book, that it's everything you need.
Oh,
Yeah,
I love
that's my
that. You're
goal.
amazing. Well, and this is so helpful. And I just love it because it just shows that anyone can do this in any way that you mentioned or a creative way that they might have, to bring this experience to our kids. And I think that's one of the neat things is the experience that they get to have and interacting with the book. So we appreciate you as librarians and teachers and the work that you're doing. And it's just amazing. And I can't wait to go to, I've been there, but I can't wait to go more to storybookwalk.com. It's so
Well,
great.
I keep adding things a lot. So, but anyways, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed being on your podcast. Yeah.
Oh, we loved it. And Kelley, can you tell people too where people might find you on your website and Instagram? And I think you have a Facebook page too.
Yeah, okay, that's true. Well, I have the two things. On the one hand, I have storybookwalk.com, which is everything Storybook Walks, and there's also a page for storybookWalk.com. And then I have my author and illustrator page, which I've had for a few years, which is just KelleyDonner.com. And that's Kelley with an EY, KelleyDonner. Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for reaching out and for being on the show and sharing your story because you're doing amazing things. So we can't
Thank you.
wait to dig in more. As always, thank you to all of our listeners for joining us for this episode of the Future Ready Librarians podcast series, Leading from the Library. And a very special thank you to our sponsors, Follett Content. You make a difference in our libraries, schools, and within our lives, and that of our students every day. We appreciate everything you do. I hope you can take what you learned in today's podcast and put it to use within your practice as a future-ready librarian. If I can support you in any way, please feel free to reach out to me on X or Instagram at Shannon M. Miller or to my email at shannonmcclintockmiller@gmail.com. I am always happy to help. Until next time, friends, keep finding ways to lead within and from your library.